I'm recording this video with permission from Scholastic. So welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be reading chapter 11 of the Tale of Despereaux. I am recording several of these recordings in one day, and I decided to sit on my beanbag this time because I was getting a little uncomfortable. So if I'm at a different angle, that's why I'm sitting on my beanbag chair here. So I hope you guys are finding some comfortable spots to read and are getting in a lot of reading during this time. But for now, we're going to be picking up the Tale of Despereaux. So if you remember, during our last chapter, chapter 10, Despereaux has basically just been sentenced to the dungeon because he did not choose to repent and renounce Princess P, but instead said he loved her, he was going to stick with that, and we're going to see what happens after that. So it is interesting. We left off with Despereaux heading to the dungeon. Let's see where we pick up. This chapter is called The Threadmaster Cometh. Oh, and remember at the very end of the last chapter, he fainted at the very end. So that's important because that's where we're picking up. When Despereaux came to, he heard the drum. His father was beating a rhythm that had much more boom and much less tap. Together, Lester and the drum produced an ominous sound that went something like this. Boom, 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 tap. Boom, 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 tap. "Make way for the thread," cried a mouse who was pushing a wooden spool of red thread through the crowd. "Make way for the thread." Boom, 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 tap went the drum. "To the dungeon," shouted the mice. Despereaux lay on his back, blinking his eyes. How, he wondered, had things gone so terribly wrong? Wasn't it a good thing to love? In the story in the book, love was a very good thing. Because the knight loved the fair maiden, he was able to rescue her. They lived happily ever after. It said so in the book. They were the last words on the page, happily ever after. Despereaux was certain that he had read exactly those words time and time again. Lying on the floor with the drum beating and the mice shouting and the threadmaster calling out, "Make way, make way," Despereaux had a sudden chilling thought. Had some other mouse eaten the words that spoke the truth? Did the knight and the fair maiden really not live happily ever after? Reader, do you believe that there is such a thing as happily ever after? Or, like Despereaux, have you too begun to question this possibility of happy endings? So I want you to pause for a second. I like how this author writes. She tells us the story, but she also pauses and says, "Reader," and kind of gives us questions to think about and gives us little tips about the story to think about. I want you to maybe answer this question with a family member when you're home or just to yourself while you're thinking there. Do you believe in happily ever after? Do you believe that, like in storybooks, when Disney movies or books or whatever wrap it up with a nice little bow and people live happily ever after? Or do you believe that it's a little more complicated than that? I want you to stop and think, and then let's keep going. "Happily ever after," whispered Despereaux. "Happily ever after," he said as the spool of thread came to a stop beside him. "The thread, the thread, the thread," murmured the mice. "I'm sorry," said the mouse behind the spool, "but I have to ask you to stand up. I have to do my job." Despereaux slowly got to his feet. "On your hind legs, please," said the threadmaster. "It's the rules." Despereaux stood on his hind legs. "Thank you," said the mouse. "I appreciate it." While Despereaux watched, the threadmaster unwound a length of red thread from a spool and tied a loop. So a spool of thread is basically a super, super long, skinny string, and the spool is kind of what it's wound up around. So if any of you guys have seen a sewing machine, usually you put the spool of thread in the sewing machine. So this threadmaster is rolling out a spool of thread, and it looks like he's going to tie Despereaux up. So let's see where we go. "Just enough for the neck," muttered the mouse. "No more, no less. That's what the last threadmaster taught me. Enough thread for the neck." He looked up at Despereaux and then back down at the loop of thread. "And you, my friend, have a small neck." The threadmaster raised his arms and put them around Despereaux's neck. He leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery. He could feel the threadmaster's breath in his ear as he worked at tightening the thread. "Is she beautiful?" the threadmaster whispered. "What?" said Despereaux. "Shh! Is the princess beautiful?" "The Princess P?" "Yes." "She's lovely beyond all imagining," said Despereaux. "Just right," said the headmaster. He drew back. He nodded his head. A lovely princess just so, like a fairy tale, and you love her as a knight loves a maiden. You love her with a courtly love, a love that is based on bravery and courtesy and honor and devotion. Just so. How do you know that? Despereaux said. How do you know about fairy tales? Shh, the mouse leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery again, green and alive. Be brave, friend, whispered the threadmaster. Be brave for the princess. And then he stepped back and turned and shouted, Fellow mice, the thread has been tied. The thread has been knotted. A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Despereaux squared his shoulders. He even made a big decision. He would do as the threadmaster had suggested. He would be brave for the princess. Even if, reader, could it be true, there was no such thing as happily ever after. And here's a picture of Despereaux getting tied up around his body. And that's where our chapter leaves off. So this is interesting. Despereaux is being all tied up and he's going to be thrown into the dungeon. This is a big punishment that he's enduring. And I want you to make sure you recognize who the threadmaster is. The threadmaster is this mouse who his job is to roll out the big spool of thread, tie up the it looks like maybe the person who's going to be punished, the criminal if you want to call him that, and put them in the dungeon. And you expect that person or that mouse to be really mean, and we notice here that the threadmaster is actually kind of nice. He's doing his job and he's following through, but he's the one who whispered in Despereaux's ear, asking about Princess P and asking, is she lovely, and fight for her and be brave. So that's really interesting to see that Despereaux might not be the only one who has a soft heart in here. He's just the only one we've seen up until meeting the threadmaster. And we did leave off with a comment from the author saying, even if, reader, could it be true, there was no such thing as happily ever after. So I want you to maybe re-evaluate what you thought earlier when I asked you, or when the author asked you, if you believe that there's a happily ever after. If you answered yes, do you still think that? And if you answered no, do you think you could maybe apply what Despereaux is going through right now to maybe influence your answers? So Despereaux really liked the idea of happily ever after, but he decided at the end of this chapter that he was going to be brave for the princess, even if things weren't going to turn out perfectly, and even if things weren't this fairy tale happily ever after. He still thought love was worth prioritizing and fighting for. So I want you to think about that, see if that changes your answer at all. So stay tuned for our next video, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!